Uh, as per usual, I have about 8-minute introduction, which is going to basically summarize the main points of the two readings. So that should be helpful if you didn't have an opportunity to do it, or if you read it a few weeks ago and need a refresher. And maybe some of what I'll review will be helpful in kicking off discussion topics, questions we can talk about. So the word disgust derives from the Latin word disgustare, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, which means to have a distaste for, which I think is a clue in terms of the evolutionary origins of disgust in our sense of taste, probably. And the term has been used in English since the 16th century to describe feelings of aversion or revulsion towards something unpleasant, offensive, or morally repugnant. It can refer to both physical sensations, such as feeling nauseated or queasy, as well as emotional reactions to things that are considered distasteful or offensive. And disgust is one of our basic emotions. So, a quick one sentence definition of an emotion: an emotion is a motivational state that potentiates situationally specific adaptive behavior. Disgust emerged as a motivational state that potentiates avoidance when confronted with stimuli that contain or potentially contain pathogens or toxins, such as rotting food, bodily waste, a dead body, a sick person. And disgust is best thought of as part of our behavioral immune system. That is, it's part of it's a suite of behaviors that promote disease avoidance and protect us from pathogens, toxins by preventing contact, because prevention is, of course, more efficient than fighting a pathogen after it's infected you. And the smoke alarm principle operates with disgust as it does with anxiety. It's better to have false positives than false negatives. So disgust may well arise in situations in which it is not necessary. Research shows that disgust entails magical thinking, that it contaminates nearby or similar stimuli, even when those stimuli are not dangerous. So just as there is guilt by association, there is disgust by association as well. And disgust likely started with our sense of taste and over evolutionary time expanded to include disgust at inappropriate sexual, moral, or cultural behavior. So a few brief comments about each of those three categories to wrap up. Let's talk first about sexual disgust. Sex involves risk of pathogens, and so sexual disgust emerged to not only avoid infection, but also to enhance mate quality. But because of the smoke alarm principle I mentioned a moment ago, it can block viable mating opportunities. So there is a cost-benefit analysis that operates, and sexual arousal can override feelings of sexual disgust. Research also finds there are sex differences in this domain. Sexual disgust or aversion is higher for women, especially in casual sex, because the risks are higher. The risks of intercourse are higher for women, and they include pregnancy, sexual assault, and reputational damage. Let's talk briefly about moral disgust. Disgust towards other people probably began as a strategy for decreasing the probability of infectious disease by avoiding contact with quote unquote contaminated others. Sick people often look different than healthy people. And it was adaptive for our ancestors to be attentive to any physical differences that could signal disease: runny nose, swelling, rashes, flushes, or other changes in skin color. I do think it's interesting that changes in skin color and appearance are one of the main signals that someone may be ill. And that has interesting implications, I think, for our evolved psychology about race. In this way, disgust may have contributed also to in-group bias, that we tend to favor people who look like us. And the idea of contaminated others soon came to include not just people that looked ill, but people who behaved in certain ways. We often feel disgust towards behavior that breaks social norms or toward people we feel are behaving immorally. And neurological findings reveal a very close relationship between disgust and moral judgment. The same areas of the brain tend to light up. Disgust helps you detect and avoid social threats. It stops you from associating with non-compliant members of your group, and which would carry reputational risk for you. And we do, because as I said earlier, we know that disgust can contaminate nearby stimuli. But disgust not only leads you to avoid and reject certain other people, it also leads you to control your own behavior and adhere to social norms. So you are not the one that is rejected. So in this way, disgust is closely related to shame, which we talked about last month. It serves to stop you from breaking those norms, which carry the risk of social rejection. And lastly, a brief comment about culture and learning and disgust. Most disgusting stimuli are culturally universal. All over the world, people experience disgust toward feces, spoiled food, decomposition and decay, vermin, pathogens, incest, and others we could list. But there are both cultural differences in what people find disgusting. For example, think of food taboos, which differ in different cultures, personal hygiene standards, attitudes towards bodily functions. There are cultural differences. And there are individual differences. For example, I know someone who, for some reason, finds the smell of wet concrete absolutely revolting. I don't know where or how that occurred, but that's an individual learning experience. One type of learning that we may be taught is that a certain group of people are disgusting. We see this in warfare, in which soldiers dehumanize the enemy. They often liken them to vermin, which we find disgusting, which makes it easier to engage in killing. But beyond that use in warfare, disgust can be weaponized by unscrupulous politicians, as Hank was alluding to before we started the recording. Disgust can encourage stigmatization, and it can be used as a political tool. Last comment, disgust is very hard to unlearn because it results in avoidant behavior. And when you avoid an object of disgust, there's little opportunity to unlearn it and realize that your disgust may be unwarranted and there's actually no danger. So I have a question to kick off discussion, but I'll say what it is and we can run with it, but we certainly can go in any direction you folks want. The question I had was, how does disgust intersect with other emotions such as empathy or compassion? Do you think disgust can hinder our ability to empathize with other people? So I will try to manage the queue. You can raise your virtual hand or your real hand, and I'll try to keep track of who wants to speak in what order. Anybody want to jump in? And you don't have to begin with my question. If you want to begin with something different, feel free. Hank.
Yeah. Um, I just heard on Pro Social, there was a talk, I forget her name, this past week, but she discussed, is this about disgust and empathy? And so I've been looking into this for a long time. And if you think about the two levels of empathy, there's the raw empathy where there's no differentiation between self and other. So it's like, I feel your pain, and my pain, even my subjective version of your pain, might even be worse or less than your pain.
Okay.
But in order to show compassion, you need the capacity for cognitive empathy, which means that we are different, we're a separate person, and I get the idea that you're hurting, and I want to try to do something about it. With disgust, it's pretty much an undifferentiated phenomenon, a basic emotion that doesn't have necessarily, if it's not, oh God, what's the word? If it's if it doesn't become differentiated, then everything is contaminated. You burn out from too much empathy, too much. It's empathy, not compassion fatigue, but empathy fatigue. So you can be disgusted by your empathy because it's destroying you. So you can hate yourself, feel ashamed.
Being
That's
disgusted by your empathy. That's an interesting
yeah,
juxtaposition I'd never
yeah,
thought of
yeah.
before.
And I see it in my work all the time.
Okay.
Those people who just plunge into empathy without being able to step back, without able to reemerge
Okay.
from the yeah.
Well, empathy might be an interesting topic for a future session of Examine Lives now that you bring that topic up. But other thoughts on disgust and yeah, yes, Marcia.
Um, is there an animal model for the study of disgust?
Do you know it's sort of interesting that you said that, and I wish I could kick it up quickly, but I can't. I actually went on ChatGPT and
Oh,
asked ChatGPT a few questions about disgust just to see what it would give me. And one of the questions I asked was, do animals exhibit signs of disgust? And I got an answer of yes with a list of examples. Unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me, but apparently there are at least some animal analogs in animal behavior. Of course, it maybe there's some anthropomorphizing to say that they're experiencing disgust in the way we do. But Diane,
Just at that point, I would say anybody who has a pet cat probably knows that there is animal disgust because they react to certain smells and foods as if they are disgusted. But that was not actually why I raised my hand. It was to say that what I have learned more about than any other part of the disgust problem is its use that we make of it as a moral emotion.
mm-hmm.
What I like to call other blaming emotion, although we can be disgusted with ourselves. But as one of the articles points out, it's very interrelated with shame by means of the fact that it motivates rejection, social rejection, and triggers fear of social rejection and so forth. So I think for me, this is one of the most interesting parts of disgust, although the physical side of it is interesting. Just one more thing to say, a lot of the moral psychology investigations have tried doing things like inducing disgust with disgusting substances and so forth to see whether that intensified moral judgment. But it seems to me that that's a rather silly way to go about it because, it's not that you start with disgust and then it spreads. Well, it might, but what's more interesting is the fact that it is an emotion and it functions socially rather than just physically.
Yeah, the research you're mentioning is sort of like what they do is prime the emotion of disgust and then see if you are harsher in your moral judgments. So
Right.
I suppose the real life analogy would be imagine you're eating some rotten food, and would that make you more disgusted and judgmental of people around you? But I think we have Andy, Hank, and then Ahmed.
Yeah. So, Steve, you mentioned that disgust as a near synonym of distaste seems to be rooted in our in taste on the one of our senses. So if that's right, then I'm imagining a story like this, right? So critters evolved to experience disgust in the presence of, say, rotting food or other problematic
Yep.
Foodstuffs, and then the neural circuitry that helped to produce the avoidant behavior ends up being accepted or repurposed to produce other adaptive avoidant behaviors. So moral disgust may piggyback off of the neural circuitry that helps us steer clear of rotting meat.
I think you have that exactly right. And if you experience mild disgust about something, in fact, you might say, I find that distasteful.
Yeah. Well, and tell me if help me, maybe you guys can help me sharpen this question. Jonathan Haidt lists purity and contamination as one of the moral foundations, one of the
Mhm.
six taste
Yes.
buds of the moral palate, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he also points out that liberals tend not to attach much weight to that particular moral foundation, but conservatives attach more weight to it. The example I've always thought about is that, if you have a visceral disgust response to the idea of, say, homosexual sex
Mm-hmm.
because you're hetero, that can spill over and cause you to have negative moral judgment, to produce negative moral judgments about homosexuality. But some people, of course, regulate that emotion in such a way as to and avoid becoming judgmental of other people's sexual tastes. That seems to me more morally mature than simply accepting the moral disgust at face value, in that particular case, at least.
Mm-hmm. You're in fact, I think, addressing my question that I ended with, which is, can you override a feeling of disgust to have more empathy? I would say that I think that Haidt is wrong about whether liberals and conservatives emphasize purity quite differently. I think liberals are as concerned with purity as conservatives, but about different things. Conservatives tend to be it's focused on sex. Liberals are quite invested in purity about food. So there's just I'm not sure there's as much of a difference in intensity as to what the objects of the emotion are. We have Hank, Ahmed, and Alan, and Diane.
Okay, I want to respond to Marcia's question. As I was looking at all this stuff, I thought of looking at contempt in relation to disgust. So I was kind of researching it. And there was one article that talks about in the animal kingdom, the apes, that in terms of they relate contempt with disrespect as opposed to respect, and then contempt is disrespect. So in the alpha system, in a small tribe or with with the apes, the alpha needs to feel, I'm trying to summarize it, I can't find it, needs to feel superior to the beta and the gamma.
Mm-hmm.
So they show contempt to those as partially as a status and hierarchy maintenance. So, and in this one article, they talk about, or maybe it's my opinion, that disgust is the more basic emotion and contempt is the more relational, and then in-group contempt, mutual contempt, and between group. So that's the hierarchy in the animal kingdom. And if I find the article, I'll send it out, at least the abstract.
That's very interesting, Hank. I think contempt certainly is related. I think there are subtle differences, but that's an interesting point you make. Ahmed.
Hi, everybody. I think the idea of disgust as related to morality, it is still puzzling for me because I don't know when the leap happens from dealing with it as something physical, something related to our evolution and survival. And
Mm-hmm.
then it happens like more or less, I think it's metaphor to what is bad and what is unhealthy for us. You mentioned that the language itself, the word itself entered the English lexicon sometime in the 16th century. So I
Mhm.
wonder what was this expression before that time. I come from Arabic Islamic culture, and we use the word najis or impure for those who are non-Muslims sometimes,
Mhm.
because we would say they don't follow the same moral orders that we are believing in.
Mhm.
And it created, of course, the idea of um, xenophobia or the hatred toward the others, or racism, as you mentioned earlier. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just wonder how come that we moved from dealing with disgust as something physical to something moral.
You raised some interesting points. I would only just remind you of one other thing I said, which was I think it's more than just a metaphor, because the neurological research shows that the same parts of the brain kind of light up when
Right.
you're experiencing disgust at rotten food and when you're making moral judgments.
Wow.
They're not identical, I think, neurologically, but certain of the same circuits are lighting up for both. So it's more than just a metaphor, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah. Alan, and that, well, no, am I right? Am I messing up the order? Is it?
No, you're right.
Okay. Alan, Diane, and Ben.
Okay, I guess I better unmute. So it sort of takes off from where what the terms Andy was talking in. I always start that we're, evolved and embodied beings, and it's pretty clear to me that there's an empathy regulation system uh, anchored with oxytocin,
Mm-hmm.
which we talk about as, the love drug, but it makes us more us-like and them more them-like. And it seems like disgust is hooked into that somehow. It's one of the emotional triggers that lets us dismiss some, conspecific, some other people as not us. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I wonder about the sort of hormonal underpinnings that are, of course, elaborated socially, and clearly there's
Alan, I can identify some people as not us without feeling disgust towards them.
right. I don't think it's the only component, but it's certainly one of the ones that's triggered by politicians when they try to talk about the thems. They're a
Yeah.
poison, they're a contamination,
Yep.
they're an impurity in the body politic. I mean, Trump talks in specifically those terms.
Oh,
Uh,
that's a nice metaphor, an impurity in the body politic. That's very nice. Yeah.
so I think I like the idea of talking about empathy next, because I think they're highly related.
Okay. Okay. Diane, Ben, and Ken.
Right. I'd like to go back to what Andy was talking about, and particularly Haidt's idea that conservatives and liberals are concerned about different moral foundations. And I would agree with Steve that liberals are just as purist as conservatives, but completely different subject matter. But I agree with Andy that, liberals also try to rise above their, what are they? What they are, I think, is in-group norms.
Mhm.
So that impurity becomes violation not of, bodily concerns, but of the traditions or the norms or the beliefs of whatever you identify with.
So disgust can kind of be virtue signaling.
So disgust can motivate virtue signaling, and it can motivate other blaming. And so it sort of promotes conformity within the group, but it
Yeah.
can also promote aggression between the groups.
It's really
I think there's
interesting,
three.
Diane.
Uh,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and
I'll stop there.
it's interesting how our conversation is there's sort of a thread that's running through our conversation, I think, which is the role that disgust plays in intergroup relations. That seems to be a something that is weaving through a lot of our comments. Ben, and then Ken, and then Marcia.
Yeah, I'm right on that. I've been doing a lot of thinking around individual versus collective. And then you quickly go from collective to breaking into subgroups, as Diane's kind of pointing out, with different cultures or and then another thread of thought is the psychological development of a human being and the maturity. What is maturity? And so kind of what's clicking around in my head as it goes, like the whole idea of the survival circuitry that was formed, culture and our collectiveness piggybacks off of that individual basic survival circuitry, if you will, to then manifest our ultra social species collectiveness that is separated. Like, it's not discussed as a major motivating driver or basic instinct, so to speak, but then how do you manage that in the collective when it's not necessarily a strictly physical survival need, but a management need? And so then you ask, well, what is humans' maturity? What is our cultural maturity? And how can we, by understanding our basic motivations and emotions and drivers, help to guide the collective in a more successful way than the whole in-group and out-group dynamics that continually keep us weighed down and keep us distracted from our evolution, if you will, and what we might be destined or curious to keep going towards. Anyway, that's
very interesting. I did read somewhere that and I don't know if it was one of the two articles that I posted, that a child doesn't experience disgust until about 3. And I
Yes.
thought, that's not right. Anybody who's tried to feed a baby a certain kind of food they don't like, the baby is pretty clear sometimes, they'll spit it out. So maybe that was referring to moral disgust or disgust about behavior doesn't occur in a child until they're about 3. I don't know, but interesting idea to think about maturity and disgust both individually and collectively. Okay. Ken, and then Marcia, and then Hank, I think.
Okay, I'm addressing some question posed by Ahmed, and it also touches on what Diane and Ben said. And just, to get back to basics. Throughout history, cohesive groups won out and defeated non-cohesive groups. And one of the main sources of cohesion was social control. Now, if a person has a built-in visceral tendency to reject something that it sees as disgusting, then you can easily see how, once language evolved, that someone's hijacking that and applying it to social controls would be beneficial to the group, not only so the evolution so that such ideas would be posed, but those who receive it, those who swallowed the hook and said, oh yes, I'm going to behave this way because that's disgusting not to. The groups that had that also succeeded over those, at least until 200-300 years ago. Once the Industrial Revolution hit, that really tight social control didn't work so well anymore, because it was helpful to have diverse individuals with new ideas, which is why countries like the United States and Holland took off and got wealthy, and very tight countries like Spain went poor. But I'm going off on another topic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to the phrase I used in my remarks about the weaponization of disgust. And I guess I'd make a distinction between you're describing how disgust was enhanced fitness, and that's a little bit different than what I meant by weaponization. Now that I think of it, I'm thinking of weaponization more in terms of a politician that quite cynically and knowingly tries to stoke disgust in order to gain power. by
Yeah,
by.
Well, that exists, but I
Yeah.
mean, you can see how the other thing evolved
Oh
into the
yeah,
species.
yeah. You
Yep.
explained it. You explained it really well, Ken. Hank, and then Marcia, I think. You're muted, Hank.
This is a question for you, Ahmed. I was looking up the Arabic for the word disgust, and I'll try to read it, but maybe if you know it's Aliyash Mizaz.
You're
Can't
muted
hear
too.
you.
You're muted. Yep.
Yeah, so Alishimzaz, I think it's less than discussed, which is having uh, trying to avoid what is not good.
Okay.
But discuss, I would say it's more of uh, inner feeling, toward the things that you say, that you see.
Uh-huh. Well, here's the dictionary, the Collins dictionary. So
I see.
it says, remember, I don't speak Arabic, so it says nausea, sickness, queasiness, disgust, squeamishness, qualm, revulsion, loathing, nausea. So is there any other term that's, because we're just speaking in English here, so we're limited. This is monocultural, really.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, in the everyday, street talk, nothing academic or anything,
Yes.
is there something? Yeah.
So the word that I'll just write it down here, which comes from the Islamic theology itself to describe both
Oh, geez.
things that are impure and unclean. So my mom would describe anything that is unclean sometimes with this word, even though it can be food that was spilled on the floor or something like that. It's
Yeah.
not something uh, particularly impure in a religious sense, but but in Islamic as well culture, there is a lot of food and so wine, pork. They would describe them with the same language because they are just impure in terms of the Islamic theology, even though they might be completely hygienic and you can just have them and you don't get sick when you eat
What
pork.
about an expression like, I'll go like, it's disgusting. Blech. Or,
One of the things that
sorry.
occurs to me as I listen to the two of you is that disgust is not black or white, it's a continuum.
Yeah.
And you can have mild disgust all the way up to, severe revulsion. And the term sometimes is applied to things that vary in terms of severity. And also, Ahmed, as you described what you were talking about, it seems to connote to me that the evolutionary linkage between the original notion of disgust having to do with food and eating and taste, and how that over time gets to be applied to things that are actually morally rather abstract.
Yes.
Yeah,
And also the cultural aspect. For example, we don't raise dogs in our homes because they are najas. They are impure, unclean according to our culture. But
Mhm.
now that I moved to the United States and I see dogs everywhere, now my disgust toward dogs has lessened. But
Ah,
so I used not
that,
to go close to them. Now I can hug a dog, which is something even my mom now will feel like repulsive about it.
that's exposure therapy, is what that is.
Maybe.
It is. It really is. Andy, or no, Marcia, and then
I,
Andy.
I just wanted to come back and Ben, by the way, summed up a lot of what I wanted to say about how cultural evolution, has changed these things. They taking a basic emotion and then spreading it around. I want to come back. Somebody used that when you mature, you're different in your and that part of the maturity that Ahmed just talked about is now he's able to see a dog through the eyes of people who love them, and that's been my current definition of when I can recognize there's an adult in the room is that they can actually see other people's point of view very vividly. And there aren't a lot of those, by the way, in the rooms. Because, but in any case, I would like to come and the whole thing about respect, because I guess I don't know the origins of the word, but it seems like you're saying I'm re-seeing something. And
Mm.
I'm seeing something through the eyes of another person. And I had never really thought of that as being profoundly respectful in that that's the most wonderful thing that you can do for a person. So I just wanted to point those things
Yeah,
out.
that's sort of the operational definition of empathy, is to be
Mm.
able to look out at the world through the eyes of another person.
But with is there a difference between just looking and then respecting what the other person is seeing? So because you
Yes,
looked at dogs before, but you never looked at them the way Americans look at dogs.
yeah, I think you're right, and I think that applies to politicians who one might find disgusting. I can look out at the world through their eyes in the sense of I can understand psychologically why they are the way they are. And so in that sense, I have empathy and I can understand, but I still might find the moral behavior they're engaging in morally repugnant. So
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
Just
And
teasing out.
I'm sorry, were you done, Marcia? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Andy.
Yeah, we've talked about disgust's rootedness in taste. Taste and smell are closely connected. And of course, we often have a disgust reflex to yucky smells as well. So just to build on the idea that the disgust reflex can be weaponized by politicians to dehumanize people. This is okay. This is not an entirely coherent chain of thoughts, but you'll see the connections and be able to make them out yourself. My understanding is that indoor plumbing and the resulting higher hygiene standards. So once indoor plumbing became normal, people expected others around them to be cleaner, to shower more often. And that, of course, made us less smelly. And I wonder to what degree cosmopolitan liberal democracies sort of depend on indoor plumbing to keep their citizens from dehumanizing one another.
Well, that's very interesting. Just one small comment is when you mention the sense of smell, another way to, it's somewhat of a mild way, but another phrase you might use to morally condemn someone is to say, you stink, or that's what you did really stinks. So there's some, the link is there. Ahmed. Oh, you're muted, Ahmed.
Sorry. I just wonder if also our just when we talked about the dog, I'm thinking about also other objects, other things that in life that we perceive as disgusting. Do they, how much of it is socially construct and how much of it just comes with our history, our evolution?
Yeah, I did mention in my remarks that there are some cultural universals. Most people in most cultures will feel disgusted by maggots eating something, rotten food. They would feel the need to be avoidant of somebody that they saw as physically ill and contagious. But then there are all these cultural variations about things like food taboos, cleanliness standards, which maybe relate perhaps to what Andy just talked about. Your level of cleanliness is going to depend on maybe the technological advancement of your society in some way. Diane.
I have
Oh, go ahead, Ahmed. Did you have
yeah,
another point?
just a tricky example, because in so semen, for example, for some people in my culture, they think it is disgusting, it's impure. And some people, they think it's not. And each one has their own justification. Some people think, well, it's just bodily fluid and it is just something disgusting. And other people, they would say, no, that's the source of life and that's what should we respect. So it's not disgusting. It's something that actually we should appreciate, or, not as disgusting as other
Right.
people. So
It's half the source of life, but yes. let's not forget. Diane.
No, I just wanted to pick up on what Ahmed was saying, because it's very important to understand that, in fact, these group identity kinds of objects of disgust or objects of purity can be entirely arbitrary. So, Hindus are disgusted by people who eat beef, and Muslims are disgusted by people who eat pork, and Westerners are disgusted by people who eat portions of entrails or testicles or things like that. These things are entirely either cultural, or they may be meaningful within some kind of meaning system. So that you have a whole set of things like food rules or dress rules or other kinds of norms that become shibboleths, basically, for belonging.
And speaking of that, Ahmed, you're wearing a baseball cap that disgusts many people, depending upon. I just happened to be in Minnesota, and last night was at the Minnesota Twins Yankees game, and the Yankees beat us yet again. So, I'm struggling to be empathic with the hat you're wearing.
Steve, I just wanted to say one thing. It's very interesting about smell as one of the senses, because it's the only sense that goes directly to the memory center. It's not processed anyplace else in the brain to begin with. So it's probably, if you were trying to figure out something that was reproducible that you would want to use to associate with something else, smell is the perfect choice.
That's fascinating. I did not know that about smell. And also maybe why a smell can evoke a memory from years ago.
Absolutely. That's exactly.
Right.
And it actually overpowers taste. It's very powerful in actually your perceptions of taste. So it's I'm just saying it's a very efficient thing to connect up.
Okay, I suppose that's why I'm not a wine drinker, but I think that must be why wine drinkers smell the wine before they drink it.
Absolutely. And all these aromatic oils that everybody's cleaning up their whole lives by smelling lovely things now.
Ken, Hank, Sage.
Okay, just very briefly, I wanted to respond to Andy's assertion about plumbing and cleanliness. It differs dramatically culturally. In 1998, my wife and I drove spent a couple of months driving through Southern Europe. And I don't know how many times I almost fainted when a bartender reached over the bar to hand me a beer and lifted his arm. The bathing frequency is much lower, or was at that time. That's 20 years ago now. Just to let you know, it's culturally, it varies dramatically.
So it's not only technology, there's also cultural differences, as I mentioned, and personal hygiene standards differ from
I mean,
culture.
culturally made it available. I mean, it's awful when you can just turn a faucet and water comes out. It makes things easier, but it doesn't.
I have a feeling that if we were all transported back to medieval or even early modern Europe, we would find the smells overwhelmingly disgusting just going about our day-to-day life.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, it's interesting that there was tremendous cultural difference too, because both in Jewish cultures and in Islamic cultures, ritual bathing was regular.
Okay.
But Christians were not. In fact, someone once said something about the Queen of Spain, that she had the aroma of sanctity or something. She didn't bathe for some period of time while the Crusades were going on.
I think they felt that we're venturing a little far afield here, but I believe that in medieval and early modern, at least in England, they believed that frequent bathing was deleterious to your health.
Right.
Yeah, it's harmful.
Yeah.
Hank.
Yeah, I wanted to take us to a little more, not personal, but more from experience. But I was thinking of the cultural transmission of disgust. Okay, based on there's the genetic, there's the fitness. So I grew up in a Yiddish-speaking family. So I couldn't remember the word for disgust or the repulsion. So I looked it up, and the word is fat. Fat. So if you grow up in that culture, you hear fat, you know, you're repulsed or somebody's repulsed. So I'm wondering now, Ken, do you speak Spanish?
I do more or less.
Do you? What's the word? I mean, if other people in their families, if you could think about what was the primary phrase that was used in your family, if they did express disgust.
Hank, by the way,
Yeah.
when you say that word, it sounds and looks like you're spitting something out of your mouth.
That's right. It is fat.
Fat.
Right. Fat. Yeah.
Well,
But
my
that's,
my grandparents were Portuguese.
Oh,
So,
okay. What's
and
the
I'm
word
trying
in
to remember
Portuguese?
what
I'm just
expression they
thinking,
used.
yeah,
And
or any of us. What did we hear at home that got? I call that the generational transmission of disgust. Okay, so if we could think about in our own family, in our own extended family, and the community we lived in, what was the slang for disgust, or what was the more yuck? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just asking about, and in Arabic, is there like a slang word for yuck or fe
Oh yeah,
that you know of?
yeah. I think it's universal among most Arabs. It's where.
Where?
Yeah.
I- In
It's
in
it's like
Turk in
yeah, but
Turkish, it's iğrenç.
What is it?
İğrenç.
That sounds good, right? Me an inch. All right. What about the American speaking families? What did you use?
Well, I must
I'm
have.
just
I think my mother would say, "Stephen, that's disgusting." That's
oh,
what I would get.
that's
Yeah.
very polished. Yeah. All right.
So,
I just if we just think about that aspect of in our personal lives, and then I mean, as a therapist, you do look at the generational transmission of anything, the good, the bad, the trauma, the assets. So it's interesting. I'm going to do a little more research on the disgust word for just to get a better sense of people. So thank you all for stimulating that part.
Yeah.
Sage, Sage.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there is something a thread to pick up there in cultural evolution on I think Joe Henrik has some initial foray of research into like the selection of sounds in relation to an environment. In particular, like people have studied like if you're on like the Mongolian steppes or the Arctic Circle where it's really windy and loud and hard to hear, like that there's a lot shorter, terser words to get across things. And I wonder that could be a study. But what I wanted to share was two ideas of where you could see this the socialization and changing disgust in two examples. One is probably be very interesting study if people have done it for COVID when everybody the rate of people who had loss of smell or reduction of smell. There's a specific term of it. A lot of people, what it really was like a rewiring of their smell so that, the smell of coffee. I actually had a roommate who was like, I can't drink coffee because it just smells so gross. And and then how people respond to that over time and whether that lessens. But it was like a reset. And then the other example that I thought of around like using smell and cleanliness was the story about fragrant like Febreze spray and like lemon spray, which is like so typical of cleaning products now. But I believe I don't really remember where it comes from, but the 1950s archetypical consumerist of here's a million products for the housewife and how to make the home this place, and then they realized that adding smell was way more powerful because they came to associate that lemony smell with it being clean. So you're just spraying it all around.
Mhm.
It feels clean.
Mhm.
And I mean, try to find a non-scented spray. I mean, what's the point? It's only for the smell. Like it doesn't even, does it clean anything? I don't know. You just spray it in the air and it smells good. So I guess it's clean. Like
Well,
people,
it would be interesting to know how many cultures around the world,
Use
even though,
Febreze.
well, not just Febreze, but what do most, at least middle class Americans do after they use the bathroom? They pick up a little spray bottle and spray to get rid of any smell.
so there's like
I
this
have a
need to
product. I
interact.
have a product to recommend that my wife discovered. It's out of essential oils and it works very well. You do it before you poop. Anyways, that's not what I wanted to talk about.
Preventive.
Huh?
Preventive spraying.
That's
Okay.
right. It works very well. I have to use it or else I get kicked out of the house.
We,
So-
we knew we'd get to the bathroom at some point with
Yeah,
the
we would.
topic,
But,
so.
I was just listening to a series of talks by a historian about the origins of anti-Semitism. And what this guy was talking about, I think a lot of it came up in Germany. I forget the times, but well, you know that with the second, with Hitler, they were vermin, like Trump with
Yep.
vermin.
Mhm.
So now what am I getting at? Oh yeah, the proliferation on political or of disgust of the imagery. So this guy was saying there's been meetings amongst historians, I don't know who want to change because the origins of the word anti-Semitism have nothing to do with Jews. It's a made-up term. I forget what it is. So it's worth looking up. But it's some guy made it up to, instead of saying I hate, it's in Germany. It was called, if you know German, Judenhassen, which means Jewish hate. I hate Jews. So this group is talking about anti-Semitism. It's not accurate. It's Judenhassen or Jew hate. So they want to get together and think about, let's change anti-Semitism, which is a made-up term, because Arab people are Semites, Middle Easterners are Semites, but it's not about that. So what's called a Jew hate. So now after today, I'm going to see if I can sit in on a meeting and look about Jew disgust.
Okay. Yeah.
As
And
a way of,
and again, you're alluding to the linkages between disgust and hate. Earlier, you talked about the linkage between
Contempt.
disgust and contempt. And when we're talking about feelings towards an outgroup, whether we use the word disgust, contempt, or hate, they all seem so closely intertwined to sort of put othering, if I can turn that into a verb. It puts othering on steroids, is what it does. It's not just that they're not us. It's that we need to hate them, feel contempt, and be disgusted by them.
And actually, we fear them. Isn't fear the driver of all of those?
Yeah, well, one of the questions I thought to begin with, and I didn't use it, but what is the difference between contempt and fear? What they have in common, of course, is they both stimulate avoidant behavior, but they also can stimulate aggressive behavior.
right.
Because if you fear or are disgusted by something, the initial instinct is avoidant behavior. I need to move away from that which disgusts me or scares me. But the alternative behavior is, or I need to destroy what fears me and what makes me feel
We
fear.
watched evolve.
And maybe I need to destroy what disgusts me as well. But yes, the emotions are all intertwined, although I think there are subtle differences between them.
Can I?
We are at the
But-
hour, but I'm fine to keep going a little bit more if people want to, at least for a few more minutes.
I got
One sentence. It seems that anger and disgust are getting to be used almost interchangeably in vernacular English.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah, you don't always, but you often do feel if something is disgusting, particularly with moral disgust, You're not just disgusted by it, you're angry at the person that is engaged in it. I think Andy talked about homophobia earlier. That would be a good example of how disgust and anger seem to get yoked together, I think. Alan.
Okay. I sort of lost the plot, but okay, fear. The idea that fear triggers disgust. In my observation is often, at least politically, you target a group that is powerless with disgust, not somebody you fear. Look at what those oh so threatening 0.2% of the population that are trans teenagers, right? Are a big target at the moment, and disgust is a major tool in marginalizing that population. But they're chosen because they're not going to fight back, at least very effectively. So, anyway.
Excellent point, I think.
Steve, can I ask a personal question to Rob?
Yes, sure you can.
Rob, is that okay? I just wondering, you didn't say much. Always, are you okay? I don't care if you don't talk.
I was just writing a comment. Absolutely wonderful conversation today. I just wanted to be in the audience to see what would happen next. Nothing disgusting at all.
All right.
And by the way,
I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I get a million thoughts. And I like the idea of going on to empathy, because I think this is really an important train to follow.
By the way, Rob,
especially.
I just want to say to Rob, you posted an article on Hilo.
Yeah.
Wasn't that you, Rob? That it's not an easy read, folks, but if you haven't read it, it's worth it. It's a really excellent article, Rob. I thought.
Steve, I'd like to take a chance on doing a presentation on empathy, since I've been interested in it for most of my adult career.
You mean you would like to take to pick one or two readings and lead the discussion? That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'll do it for next time.
Yeah,
would you like to do it next time?
Yeah,
sure.
Because we had talked about doing norms, but I can postpone that.
No, you can do it. I'll do it the time after.
Okay, so
Well,
Diane,
people seem to think that it would be a natural sort of segue from disgust.
I'm good. Same amount of work, so whatever you guys want.
well, let's do empathy because it flows naturally out of what we talked about today, and then we can do norms. And Hank, I think having you get to pick the articles and lead the discussion next month will make you more empathic with what I've been doing. So I'm all.
That's right. Yes, I can walk in your shoes.
As I've been empathic with Andy, who did this for 2 years before he stepped down.
But Steve, are you particularly nervous? See, I would probably be more nervous than you, so I want you to have empathy for me, because I don't do this anymore regularly.
I'm seldom. If I feel prepared, I'm not nervous.
Oh, okay.
I feel nervous if I feel like I haven't prepared, but if
yeah. The reason I feel nervous is because I'm exaggerating, but my parents were disgusted by my fine mind. I'm exaggerating. It's too strong, but they really didn't appreciate it. So it makes me
I know
nervous.
you've talked before about the path not taken into the shoe business.
That's right. You got it, buddy.
Yeah. So
empathy, right over.
Well, listen, everybody. Have a great day. And Ahmed, I'm sorry if I insulted you about the Yankees. I grew up outside of New York, so for much of my life I would have had that hat on as well. So.
Hey, Steve, before you end the call, if anybody's in the mood for an utterly shameless attempt to weaponize disgust against Donald Trump, I've posted a poem I wrote on the occasion of his first indictment, where it all kind of spilled out in an utterly intemperate fashion, and I'm kind of proud of how it turned out. You might enjoy it, but don't read it if you're faint of heart.
Can we leave this on long enough to read that?
If you go,
can I say one more thing about that?
Well, go into the chat and click on the 3 dots at the top, and you can save the whole thing onto your computer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh. Super.
I think if you open the particular attachment file too, it will open as a separate document.
Yes. Go ahead, Diane.
I just wanted to point out that MAGA rhetoric makes extensive use of disgust, and particularly this business about groomers.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that liberals are cannibals, pedophiles and groomers is just, it's an amazing kind of
We're going to clean out the swamp.
what do you call it?
Yes,
We're
Huh?
going to clean out the swamp.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's this, but
It's right
Well,
out of the Evo
things
site
that never would have occurred to me in my 80 years,
Well, one way that you can, I mean, this is stating the obvious. One way you can increase in-group cohesiveness is to tell your followers that the enemy is disgusting in some way, not
Yes.
just different or have different values, but is disgusting. And speaking of the origins of disgust in eating and taste, what could be more disgusting than to tell your followers that the enemy are cannibals? That's about as primal as I could imagine an accusation being.
They'll eat you.
Isn't it true that the
no,
liberals
they'll
only
eat your
take advantage-
children.
Yes, they'll eat your, what could be more disgusting?
Pedophile cannibals, yeah.
Yeah, pedophile cannibals. There you go.
Hmm.
All right, everybody. On that cheery note, we'll
Well,
Nope.
yeah,
Thanks,
so we'll do we will do Hank and empathy, right? And then next we'll do Diane with norms, which I think will follow greatly following our building up
Yes.
to social construction. And then we'll have one more session before our 4-year anniversary.
and I have a suggestion for the one more session. I would be interested in maybe a session on suicide. There is an evolutionary theory that has been advanced to explain suicide, which would seem to be pose a problem for evolutionary theory, in terms of why somebody would kill themselves. So that might be, we can think about that, but if there's interest, that might be one I'd be interested in. I don't know anything about it, so it would give me an opportunity to teach myself about it as well as have a discussion about it.
Well, there's the idea of altruistic suicide.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
All right,
right.
well, if anybody has any thoughts for that 48th session for 4 years, maybe we have a no topic session or something like, I don't know, whatever. Because
Something more optimistic. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care, everybody. Thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Oh,